Welcome to the Sad Crime Channel. Today's case took place in 2007 in Pleasant Grove, Utah, United States, where Michele and Martin MacNeill lived as a family. Michele Summers was born on January 15, 1957, in Concord, California. She grew up in a warm family home where her parents tried to provide her with a happy childhood. At school, Michele excelled academically, played the violin, was a cheerleader, and was very popular. She was also a very pretty girl and often participated in beauty contests, and in 1976, she was crowned Miss Concord. Michele and her whole family were very religious. They placed great importance on matters of faith and regularly attended church. The Summers family were Mormons, belonging to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it was at a meeting of single people belonging to this church that Michele met a young man, Martin MacNeill. She was fascinated by him from the very beginning. Handsome, confident, well-mannered. Martin quickly captured the heart of the beautiful Michele. Very quickly, because just a month after they met, Michele and Martin got married. Michele was very happy, but she still longed for a child to complete her happiness. She had always dreamed of becoming a mother, and within the first 5 years of marriage, Michele and Martin became parents 4 times. They had 3 daughters, Rachel, Vanessa, and Alexis, and 1 son, Damien. Michele took care of raising the children and managing the huge house they lived in. She was a wonderful mother who devoted all her time to her children. She made sure the children were always well-groomed, clean, and neatly dressed. Meanwhile, her husband pursued his career, completed medical school, and became a psychiatrist. He also completed law school, but never practiced in that profession. Martin was very proud of his education. Whenever he was in new company, he made sure everyone knew he was a doctor. He was far from modest. Rather, he was a man who liked to boast about his success and wealth. The MacNeill family did quite well in life. They didn't complain about money, and Martin did everything to make it visible to others. For this reason, many people considered him an arrogant snob. Although allegedly, at home with his family, he was a completely different person. As the children grew up, the MacNeills began to have problems with one of their daughters, Vanessa. She fell into the wrong crowd and started abusing drugs. At a fairly young age, she also became pregnant but had no intention of raising the child. So Michele and Martin decided to adopt a girl, whom they named Ada. But their family didn't stop growing there, as they soon made another decision to adopt 3 children from Ukraine. And 3 more girls, Giselle, Elle, and Sabrina, came into their home. On the outside, the family seemed perfect. A beautiful wife, a handsome husband with a good job, 8 children, and a magnificent house. What more could one want? But the family hid its secrets, unknown to those who didn't know them. Despite being a psychiatrist himself, Martin had problems with his mental health. Several times during their marriage, he threatened to take his own life. The first time was in 1994, when it was discovered that his relationship with a female patient in a psychiatric hospital was too intimate. Another incident occurred in 2000. At that time, his wife caught him watching adult content, which led him to a state where he threatened her with a knife, warning at the same time that he would harm himself too. 5 years later, in 2005, the situation repeated itself. Michele again noticed that Martin was watching inappropriate materials, and again he threatened to commit suicide. For a psychiatrist, he was very emotionally unstable. When Martin turned 50, Michele noticed a big change in his behavior. He began to excessively care for himself. He lost weight, started exercising, and using a tanning bed. This behavior raised suspicions. Perhaps her husband was taking care of himself so much because of an affair. These suspicions seemed even more justified as Martin spent more time away from home than with his family. He constantly had to work overtime. Michele's friends also pointed out his behavior to her. Like Michele, they thought he might be hiding an affair from her. Michele shared her observations with her daughter, Alexis. She told her that she felt there was another woman in her father's life. Alexis came up with the idea that when her father was asleep, they could connect his phone to the computer and copy the entire call log. When they did this, they noticed that Martin frequently dialed one number, even late at night. It belonged to Gypsy Jillian Willis. The women didn't know anyone by that name. They thought it might be a pseudonym for a dancer from a nightclub. However, Michele wasn't going to leave it at that. The next day she had a conversation with her husband about it, but Martin denied everything. He had no affair, and taking care of himself would only benefit his health and well-being. He suggested that Michele could also take better care of herself by having plastic surgery. She might feel better immediately. Although such a comment wasn't very polite, Michele began to consider this option. Even though she never felt the need herself, she hadn't thought about improving her appearance before. Her husband's suggestion made Michele seriously consider it. Perhaps after the surgery, when she looked younger, she would be more attractive to Martin. He wouldn't pay attention to other women then. When Martin noticed that his wife was willing to have a facelift, he pressured her even more. He wanted it to happen the following week. Michele didn't see why she should hurry. She herself considered summer appointments. She was slightly overweight and thought it would be best to lose a few pounds before having a facelift. Summer would also be easier because their daughter Alexis, who was also studying medicine, would be home for almost 3 months and could take care of her mother, who would need care after the operation. But Martin was adamant. The spring break was approaching, which Alexis had at her college, and according to him, it was the perfect time for such a procedure. Regardless of Michele's thoughts, Martin made an appointment with a plastic surgeon and immediately booked the surgery date. During the visit, Michele didn't say much. The conversation was mainly led by Martin. He determined with the surgeon which procedures were to be performed. And in addition to the facelift, which he persuaded his wife to have, he wanted a few other corrections to be made, including eyelid lift, nose correction, and chin line enhancement. There were so many procedures that Michele had to be under anesthesia for 9 hours, as long as her surgery lasted. Normally, so many procedures aren't performed at once, but in this case, Dr. Martin requested it, and it seems the surgeon couldn't refuse his colleague. The operation took place on April 3, 2007. After it was over, Michele didn't feel very well. Her whole face hurt, but in this case it probably wasn't anything unusual. However, Martin asked the surgeon to prescribe a few additional medications which aren't normally prescribed after such surgery. Believing his wife had a very low pain threshold, he asked for 5 additional painkillers and sleep aids to be prescribed. It was necessary to be very careful in their use. Care had to be taken not to use them simultaneously. But Martin assured the surgeon that he himself would take care of his wife after returning home, so he had no concerns about prescribing all these medications. Despite her husband's objection, Michele stayed in the hospital for another night. She didn't feel well, and she knew she would have the best care in the hospital, especially since Michele had problems with high blood pressure. Alexis picked her up from the hospital, but when they arrived home, Martin stated that he could take care of Michele and he didn't have any other plans for the rest of the day. Their daughter took advantage of the afternoon off, but when she came home in the morning, she was shocked at her mother's condition. She was so drugged with medication that she couldn't make any contact with her. When she asked her father what had happened, why Michele was in such a state, he said he might have given her too many pills. She had previously vomited, so he gave her an extra dose of medication. Alexis was surprised by her father's answer. After all, he was a doctor. He should know exactly how many pills he could give her. She decided then that she would administer Michele's medication. Alexis had a week off from college, and during that time, she could take care of her mother. But the week passed quickly, and she had to return to college. However, before she left, Michele said something to her that worried her. During a bath, when Alexis was washing her hair, her mother told her that her father was constantly giving her some pills, even though she didn't need them. And because her face was bandaged after the operation and she had a bandage over her eyes, she didn't know what medications they were. So, she asked Alexis to show her 1 pill of each type that had been prescribed to her. She wanted to know the shape of each one to learn how to distinguish them. Michele warned her daughter that if anything happened to her, she should make sure it wasn't Martin's doing. These words didn't sound very optimistic, but despite this, Alexis had to leave home. The next day, April 11th, she spoke to her mother before 9 a.m. Michele was feeling much better. She was very surprised at how Martin treated her after Alexis left. He was exceptionally kind to her. And that was the last time Alexis could talk to her mother. In the morning, Martin had to go to work. That day, there were trade fairs he had to attend. A few hours later, he picked up their younger daughter Ada from preschool and arrived home a few minutes after 11:30 a.m. When they entered the house, Michele didn't respond to their calls. Martin began to search for her downstairs, while Ada was supposed to check if her mom was upstairs. After a while, Martin heard the girl scream. She found her mother lying unconscious in a bathtub full of water, unresponsive. Because Martin was using a walking stick at the time, it took him a while to reach the upstairs bathroom. He tried to pull Michele out of the tub, but he couldn't, so he just drained the water and sent Ada to get a neighbor. Meanwhile, he called the emergency services, but during the call, he behaved strangely. He was angry and yelled at the dispatcher the whole time. Martin was so angry that as soon as he conveyed the problem, he hung up. The dispatcher called him back because she didn't even know which address to send the ambulance to. However, Martin, who was still giving Michele first aid, was in the same nervous state. He continued to yell into the phone and hung up again after a while. When the dispatcher finally connected with him for the third time, she managed to get the address where Martin and his family lived. But by accident, or maybe not, Martin gave the wrong address. Perhaps he wanted the ambulance to arrive as late as possible. In any case, when the medics arrived at their house, 30 minutes after Martin's first call, they did everything they could to save Michele. During the resuscitation, Martin behaved exactly the same as during the emergency call.
Police Department.
Hey, it's County. How are you?
Hi, very good.
Good. Hey, we got a distress caller from 305 Mill Creek.
Yes?
I don't know if you guys have an address like that or not.
Yeah, we do. I know that area. 305 what?
He just said it was, all we could get was 305 Mill Creek. And he said he sounded really stressed out. I don't know what it was. It may have been medical, I think. It sounded more like medical. He mentioned something about his wife.
Was it 305, did he give west or south?
He didn't. And we tried to get it out of him, and then he disconnected, and nothing came up on our caller ID.
Okay, I know it's a gated community we have, so I know.
Okay.
I wonder, could it have been 3005 Mill Creek, I wonder?
It could have been. It sounded like he said 30, because he said 30. I cut the 305 at
yeah,
it
it's 3005 North Mill Creek. Okay.
3005 North?
Yeah, do you have a callback number by chance?
You know, we didn't. Nothing came across our screen.
No name or nothing?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Pleasant Grove Police Department.
Transfer medical.
I need an ambulance. I'm going to 305 Mill Creek.
Okay, what's the problem, sir? Lee Medical. Sir, what's wrong?
I was falling in the bathtub.
Who's in the bathtub? Who's in the bathtub?
My wife.
Okay, is she conscious?
She's not. She's not put on a position.
Okay, sir. Sir, I need you to calm. Sir, I can't understand you, okay? Can you calm down just a little bit? Okay, your wife is unconscious?
She is unconscious. She's underwater.
Okay, did you get her out of the water?
I can't. I couldn't let her. I let the water out. She's not in progress.
She's under the water?
She is out of the water now. The woman was giving me an ambulance.
Okay, is she breathing at all?
She is not.
Okay, sir, the ambulance has been paged. They're on their way, okay? Do not hang up. What? Sir?
He kept yelling, asking Michele why she wanted plastic surgery so badly. Why didn't she listen to him when he advised against it? It was clear to the medics that Martin was in shock, but such a reaction was rather unusual. When the rescuers tried to restore Michele's vital functions, Martin called his daughter Alexis to inform her of what had just happened. He didn't go into details. He just briefly said that he found his wife in the bathtub and called for an ambulance, then hung up. Alexis immediately went to the airport to return home as soon as possible, thinking all the time about her mother's words, that in case of her death, she should make sure it wasn't her father behind it. Could it be that Michele had a premonition that Martin wanted to harm her? Despite 45 minutes of resuscitation, Michele couldn't be saved. Martin offered the medics $10,000 to keep trying to save her, but there was no chance of bringing her back to life. Michele died, and a later autopsy showed that her death was due to natural causes, due to myocarditis, cardiovascular disease, and hypertension. There were no suspicions of the involvement of third parties, so no investigation was initiated. Neither her children nor Michelle's siblings could believe it. Alexis was convinced that her father had given her mother too many pills, and the overdose was the cause of her death. Before she even arrived home, she contacted her sister Rachel, who lived closer to their parents and arrived at their house earlier than her. She wanted Rachel to take all the pills that had been prescribed to their mother. She wanted to count exactly how many pills Michelle had taken since the operation, but the pills couldn't be found. Martin initially claimed that maybe the police took them, or maybe they were somewhere in the garage. It was his son, Damien, who admitted that his father asked him to flush all the pills down the toilet because seeing them made him even sadder. After the autopsy, Martin made sure that his wife's funeral took place as soon as possible, exactly 3 days after her death. He was well aware that part of Michelle's family blamed him for her death. That's why he didn't allow them to attend the funeral. He threatened that if any of them showed up during the funeral, he wouldn't hesitate to call the police. It's not the typical behavior of a grieving widower. None of these people showed up at the funeral. They didn't want to cause trouble. But there was one woman no one knew, a young brunette. At the time, nobody knew her, but they would soon find out who she was. Shortly after the funeral, Martin decided that he would have to hire a nanny for the younger children. He wouldn't be able to take care of them himself. The 4 youngest daughters were between 6 and 12 years old. Someone had to take care of them. Alexis offered to help. She was willing to sacrifice her career for the sake of her siblings. But Martin didn't want to hear about such a solution at all. He didn't want his daughter to give up the possibility of becoming a doctor just to take care of her sisters. After all, he could hire someone to do it. Soon he announced to his children that he had found the right woman. Her name was Jillian. Alexis and Rachel were shocked when they heard that name. They only asked if it was Gypsy Jillian Willis. After all, that was the name of the woman their mother suspected of having an affair with their father. Martin confirmed that it was indeed that woman, but denied having an affair with her. And less than 2 weeks after Michelle's death, Gypsy moved into their house. She had no experience in taking care of children, but she still got the job. Alexis and Rachel, as soon as they saw her, recognized her as the woman who was at their mother's funeral. More and more pointed to Michelle's suspicions about Martin's affair being true. However, they couldn't do anything about it. Gypsy, as a nanny, didn't perform her duties very well. She didn't cook, clean, or take care of the children very often. Instead, she took every opportunity to take care of Martin. And 3 months after Michelle's death, Martin and Gypsy visited her parents. Martin assured them of his love for Gypsy, which he pursued with much greater affection than Michelle's. Gypsy was the love of his life. He took advantage of the opportunity, being in the presence of Gypsy's parents, to propose to her. Alexis and Rachel were shocked by their father's behavior. So little time had passed since Michelle's death, and he had already found a candidate for his next wife. However, Alexis's conversation with Martin on this topic resulted in her being banned from showing up at the family home, and the father gathered the remaining children and informed them that Alexis was no longer a member of their family and none of the younger siblings had the right to talk to her. Rachel and Alexis started a blog where they wanted to find out if their father had any other lovers before Gypsy appeared in his life. And they quickly started receiving messages from women whom he cheated on their mother with before Gypsy. With this information, they went to the police. It wasn't evidence of murder, but they hoped it would make the police take a closer look at the case. As it happened, they met 2 policemen who became interested in the case and decided to investigate the doctor's past. And it turned out that Martin MacNeill's entire life was a string of lies. The police found that when Martin applied to medical school, he used someone else's high school diploma. Indeed, he did graduate from medical school, but he didn't finish high school and didn't pass the final exams at that school. That wasn't his only fraud. After marrying Michelle, he was arrested for opening an account in the name of a deceased person and writing checks without sufficient funds amounting to $36,000. He spent the money within 2 days on a shopping spree. He bought furniture, jewelry, 60 pairs of socks, over 20 pairs of shoes, and interestingly, a year's supply of chocolate-covered cherries. Martin was sentenced to 2 years in prison, of which he spent 180 days behind bars. But neither his criminal past nor lack of a high school diploma prevented him from becoming a doctor. Not even his purported schizophrenia hindered him. When he joined the military in his youth, he was discharged after 2 years due to hearing voices in his head. These voices encouraged him to kill, and because access to weapons in the military is relatively easy, Martin's superiors didn't know how it might end. Since he served in the military for 2 years, he received a veteran's pension of $3,000 per month. He collected this benefit for 30 years, even when he was already a doctor, and his annual earnings were very high. Alexis and Rachel couldn't believe all these revelations. The father they knew and respected all their lives until Michelle's death turned out to be a fraud and manipulator. They saw him in a completely different light all their lives. To them, he was a man who liked to help people. Thanks to him, Alexis decided to become a doctor. She wanted to be like her father. She didn't see how wrong she was in her assessment. In 2009, Gypsy and Martin were arrested, but this arrest had nothing to do with Michelle's death. They sent their eldest adopted daughter, Giselle, to her family in Ukraine. She was supposed to stay there for 2 months, but when that time passed, no one showed interest in bringing her back to the United States. Martin didn't answer her calls or texts. It wasn't a coincidence. Martin and Gypsy deliberately sent and left Giselle in Ukraine. This maneuver was necessary for stealing the girl's identity. Gypsy had loans totaling around $50,000 to $60,000. Her credit history wasn't great, so a new identity would allow her to take out new loans. They used Giselle's insurance number and created a completely new person named Gillian MacNeill, purportedly Martin's daughter. They obtained an ID card under that name, opened bank accounts, and prepared the ground for taking out new loans. However, detectives who started observing the couple found out about it. Martin was arrested when he got off the plane, while Gypsy was arrested at Martin's house the same day. Supposedly, they planned to sell the property and move to another city, but for now, they had to postpone those plans for a while. Martin was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and his partner to 2 years. Giselle, who was left in Ukraine by Martin with no means to live, was brought back to the United States. When Gypsy and Martin were in prison, investigators began to take a closer look at Michelle's death. No one had done so before because, at the time, it was believed that she died of natural causes and there was no need to investigate. However, when the police became interested in the case, they had more and more doubts about the natural causes of Michelle's death. Initially, they decided to look at the autopsy report, specifically the toxicology tests. There were traces of 4 to 5 drugs prescribed to her after the operation in her blood. These medications were administered to her no earlier than an hour before her death. It was strange because Alexis, who left home just a few hours earlier, claimed that when she left, Michelle didn't need any more medication. She felt well enough not to want to take any more pills. It's known that she didn't take them herself because she still had bandages on her eyes and couldn't see anything. Her daughter suspected that Martin might have given her mother the pills in her food. Another thing the investigators noticed was Michelle's position when she was found. Ada, the daughter who found her, said her mother was lying completely in the tub with her face upwards. Their father, on the other hand, maintained that he found his wife slumped over the tub. Her legs were outside the tub, while her head was under the water's surface, as if the woman was preparing to take a bath and fainted while standing by the tub. Martin's version, however, made no sense. Firstly, according to what he told the emergency dispatcher, he couldn't pull Michelle out of the tub. If most of her body was outside the tub, it seems that a man who spent a lot of his time exercising shouldn't have had any problem with it. Martin also told the dispatcher that he was performing resuscitation. It would have been impossible if Michelle had been in the position he described, but the biggest evidence that he was lying were the watermarks on the backs of the legs and buttocks, indicating a sitting position. This was also the position Michelle's neighbor, who ran over immediately after being called by Ada, saw her in. It's also highly unlikely that Martin performed CPR on his wife. Throughout the call to the emergency number, he kept emphasizing that he was in the midst of performing it. However, when the paramedics arrived at his house and began resuscitating Michelle, a lot of water came out of her mouth. It was as if no one had properly performed CPR before. because water should have been expelled with the first breaths. 2 months after Martin regained his freedom in August 2012, he was charged with the murder of his wife, and the trial began in October 2013. Many people testified during the trial, and almost every subsequent testimony added something new to the case and only further incriminated Martin. One of the witnesses was his former lover, Anna. Martin confessed to her that he had killed several people. From what she knew, he even tried to kill his own mother, but his sister called an ambulance and managed to save her. Unfortunately, Martin's brother Roy didn't have such luck. He attempted to take his own life several times, as Martin claimed, just to get attention. In Martin's opinion, his brother only brought shame to the family. Once, when Martin found him in the bathtub and saw that both wrists were bleeding, without much thought, he pushed his head underwater and helped him depart from this world. No one even suspected him of that at the time. During their relationship, Martin even offered to kill her husband because he didn't treat her well. However, Anna didn't take up the offer. It seemed that killing was his way of solving problems. When it turned out that one of his daughters, Vanessa, had drug problems, Martin offered her a joint suicide. One can only assume that he wouldn't have kept his end of the bargain. In general, more people from Martin's surroundings took their own lives, his brother, his sister, and in 2010, when Martin was convicted of fraud, also his only son, Damien. Damien was a law student, but he was considered a dangerous person by his classmates, fascinated by murders and loving to discuss the joy of killing. When Martin's sentence was announced, Damien attempted suicide by taking a large number of pills. Anna also testified that Martin told her that you could give someone drugs that would cause a heart attack, but wouldn't be detected in toxicology tests. During the trial, Gypsy's former roommate also testified, having a lot to say about Martin. Their relationship began 16 months before Michelle's death. Martin was fascinated by his new lover, reciprocally. Everything in this perfect relationship was ruined by Michelle. Gypsy often wondered how to get rid of her. She talked about poisoning her or cutting the brake lines in her car. Alexis suspected that Gypsy might have helped Martin in the murder of her mother. There was no concrete evidence that Martin killed his wife, but the clues were strong enough that after 11 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, for which he was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 15 years. On April 6, 2017, after 2.5 years in prison, Martin was found unconscious near the prison greenhouse. In a place where there were no cameras, he used the gas that heated the greenhouse. He decided to take his own life by inhaling it. He was found by 2 fellow inmates, but despite immediate assistance, he could not be saved. During an earlier investigation, the detectives managed to uncover some very interesting information. After his wife's death, Martin changed his will, leaving each of his children $1. The rest of his estate was to be given to Gypsy Willis. And that's the end for today. Thank you for listening until the end. Until next time, goodbye and stay safe.